Okay, students, so I'd like to do right now is talk about design principles, and these are the things that your final project really are built on. Okay, things like balance, the grid, so forth. Okay, so I'd like you to consider these things as you think about your redesign project for your final. Okay, now first off is figure and ground, and it's really pretty straightforward. Here we see a variety of flowers which are the figure, and the green in the background is the ground. And in this instance, if you were to look at it, you might say, well, in this one there's really quite a bit more flowers covering everything and there's less ground. And so when you combine the two, you can get a different feel or a different look. Okay? There's also balance, symmetry, and harmony. Okay? These are some very, very simple examples of balance. Okay? We have this right here, which is a single leaf straight up the middle, two leaves which are side by side, leaves all in a row, which is perhaps a good example of rhythm. This, which is leaves arranged in a pinwheel sort of arrangement, and it too has a certain rhythm. This one has a certain rhythm as well. Okay, but this one is really kind of not like the others. Okay, and we have small, we have large, yet the small one does have kind of a strange visual balance, doesn't it? Take a look at it for a minute there. Okay, even though it's smaller, because it's close to the edge, it's away from the other leaf, there's a lot of visual tension there. And that's the kind of balance that I'd like you to try to focus on. Okay, when we do design work, it's very simple to just stack things up the middle. Okay, but this is more challenging and it's more interesting to the eye. Okay, let's take a look at these two before we talk about the specific issues that they're talking about. Alright, here we have three arrows, red, green, blue, and they're just going down in a kind of like they were going down a slide, let's say. Okay, they're all the same size. They are really not interesting, with the exception that they're arranged like this. Okay, now let's take a look at this graphic, okay, which is working with a grid. Alright, and here we have that they've established some different things. Okay, there's some rhythm here with the graphics that are in the design. Okay, and you can see lines where they knew, okay, we're going to have a bunch of graphics and we need a place for them. Okay, they needed a place for text, and so they have that. They needed a place for the header graphic, so there's a place for that. That's represented in the grid. They have this graphic, okay, which lives somewhat in the grid of those images. Okay, and they have a few different elements, such as this yellow background, which is not exactly part of a design, but it does add color, okay, to an otherwise white newspaperish looking design. Okay, and they also have some of the other stuff here. Okay, from a marketing standpoint, if we were to take a look at this, we might see that here we have the branding. Okay, here we have different offerings, and here we have the call to action, ebooks your way. Okay, and different ways that you can find out information, dig in with a PDF and so forth, and then a response button. Okay, so all of this is a grid all working together to provide some stuff, such as branding, information that you might want to present initially, call to action information, including how to dig deeper if you're interested. Okay, so this grid design offers much more communication flexibility than something like this, which is just stacked arrows. Okay, they could have put a big red logo here. They could have put some put a picture of a sheep here, and they could have put a PDF over here where somebody could just go ahead and click on the button or download the PDF, but the layout wouldn't be as rich or as interesting as that design. Okay. Also, we have the rule of thirds. Okay, and in a sense, this graphic does not represent the rule of thirds that well. Okay, this one represents it fairly well. Here we have a third of it devoted to call of action. Then the upper part kind of devoted to branding, if you will. Okay, or third here, branding. Third here, find out more. Third here, call to action. However you might want to cut this information, okay, that is a good example of rule of thirds in action, even though it's complicated. Okay, and that's another thing that I'd really like you to focus on for your final. Okay, using rule of thirds effectively. Okay. Other design principles include points, lines, plane. Okay, and a plane is a two-dimensional flat surface, so this could be considered a plane. Okay, but as you can see, you can get kind of an interesting effect just combining lines and planes. Okay. Now, shape, form, and scale are really, really critical, especially scale. Okay, if we were to think back to our graphic, all right, let's go back to our graphic of our grid layout. Okay, if we were to go back to this graphic, okay, let's try to zoom in on it a little bit. Okay, there we go. Will it let us? There we go. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit larger than I need to be. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm trying to make it a little larger. Okay, so here we see an example of rhythm, and that's good. But also there's a couple of things here that provide scale. All right, and one of those that seems pretty clear to me is the sheep. Okay, not only are the sheep's eyes and face straight up the middle of the design, okay, it's fairly large in terms of its comparison to the logo, in comparison to these things. Okay, and I would say that this is something that you might be able to take a look at when you do a redesign. You really should ask yourself, okay, how does this sheep fit in with the design and what I want to communicate? Okay, if the scale of this sheep is out of scale with what you want to communicate, well, the sheep is just too large. Okay, right now this big red logo is providing quite a bit of balance. Okay, it's something that literally you have to play with. Okay, you have to do different versions of a design to achieve good scale. Okay. All right. So, shape relationships. All right. This is one of the biggest things that you could work on. Okay, and you could take all day trying to work some of these things out, such as, you know, how close should one thing be to another? Should it be overlapping? Okay, should it be inside? Well, those are all good questions, and really the only thing that that helps is playing with the layout and seeing what's working, and seeing, is there anything that's being communicated by that particular layout. Okay. There we go. Sorry, I lost my browser there for a moment. Okay. Also, there's positive and negative space. All right. Now, I would like to say that this really just shows a reverse of an image. It's not necessarily the best indication of positive and negative space. And instead, let's kind of take a look at this here. Okay. This is an interesting shape inside this rectangle. Okay. This is also an example of negative shape, or negative space, where it's cut out there. But you also have negative space relationships, such as the ball in relationship to the rectangle. If you were to make this ball a little closer, you would create more visual tension, and thereby you would create more visual interest. You could also go too far, such as this one, or you could have this one, in which really now you're creating something that isn't two different objects. It really looks like one object, which is a rectangle with a ball on it. Okay. So color is really, really important. Okay. Additive color is the sort of color in which you are adding red, green, blue. This is the kind of color that your computer monitor uses, and that's why when your computer monitor is off, it's black. Okay, and so as you add more light in different colors, you get white. That's why this is all white here, because red, green, and blue, which are the colors of your monitor, are all being added at the same time. However, there's also subtractive color, and this is the kind of color that's used in print. You have yellow, magenta, cyan, and when you add those colors together, the more you add, the darker things get, and so it becomes black. For example, oftentimes they are printing on white paper. Okay, and as they add more and more cyan, yellow, and magenta, I'm sorry, let me get that right, my mouse got stuck. Cyan, yellow, and magenta, okay, they all add up to black, which is K. That's why you have CMYK. Alright. Texture is an important thing that you can incorporate. It can be very specific to a design, and so it's something that you have to experiment. You can have visual texture with as you're experimenting with rhythmic things, but so we're really not talking about craggly lines in a cracked looking vase. We're really talking about the texture of things in terms of their relationship to each other. Contrast is also important. Okay, so we have this image, for example, and the contrast between the yellow and the blue and the riot of that color with this old carved door is an interesting contrast. Okay. White space is important, and it's something that I'd like you to try to focus on in your redesign. It's easy to want to fill every single part of a layout, but as you can see in this graphic, the tree receding into the background and also into the atmosphere, it looks like it's getting foggier as it goes back, is no less important than the tree in the foreground. Okay, together it all creates one image, one feel, and that's an important thing as you consider white space. Okay. Repetition can be pretty important, and it's I feel that it's related to rhythm. Okay, and I don't think that this is necessarily the best example of repetition. It can be kind of something to decorate things, but it really kind of depends what feeling you're trying to convey. Okay, I feel that this image is a better example of rhythm than this one is. The only rhythm that I really feel from this one is squiggly lines. Okay, and then of course there's movement, and you can have movement that isn't represented by, you know, body shapes or something like that. It can be how does your eye get drawn. So for example here, this graphic is out to the left, and this graphic, which is the same thing, is out to the right, and it seems that they want to draw your eye through that way. So movement's an important part of design. Okay, there we go. Then you can also have 3D illusions and shading, as well as perspective. Okay. You can have greater emphasis, and I think that this is very related to scale, but in terms of type, color, size, or contrast, that really is important when you're considering the emphasis of things, and hierarchy also counts quite a bit. You can achieve a lot of different things with hierarchy, not by having something be boldened up at the very top with other things down below. There are other ways to create hierarchy using your grid, using the rule of thirds, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, in terms of typography, that's really a lecture unto itself. Okay, but suffice to say that there's a character, such as this O here. Okay, and you have a font, which is an entire set of characters and all the symbols that go along with it. The exclamation mark, you name it, the period, everything goes along with that. All right, leading is the space from baseline to baseline. In other words, here to the next line. Points are the measure of type. Okay, type is, you know, type size is the size of it, and just because it's the same font size from font to font doesn't mean that it will actually appear the same. So if you were to have a cursive font, this would look really quite different. Okay, and then of course style and weight matter hugely. Okay, these are some examples of different font families. You have serif, which always have these little ticks on the ends. Okay, and then you have sans serif, where they don't have that. Generally, serif fonts are easier to read if you're going to use them in copy. Okay, sans serifs are great for headlines and so forth. Cursives can be difficult to use. Okay, but they're usable. But they have a definite connotation, don't they? You can have different fantasy fonts, all kinds of different things. You've seen all the different font selections that your software comes with, and it can get kind of crazy. Then also, you can letter space to get a different feel from a font, but also there are monospace fonts. Courier is one of those where every single letter takes up the same amount of space. Okay, and generally I don't use them. That's why Courier, frankly, it doesn't read very well. It doesn't have great legibility. Okay. Alright, so some good rules of thumb on using fonts: don't use more than one or two fonts. Okay, use one sans serif and one serif font, and of course you can have the entire family represented within that font, but that's something to keep in mind. Body text is usually 10-point type, 12-point for on-screen documents. Subheads are larger and headlines are 36 plus. These are rules and they're meant to be broken. You can have all kinds of different ways of doing text, and keep in mind how you design it, the visual tension that you create, the importance that you give type in a design can really change greatly how large you want it. Okay? Alright. So here's an example of automatic kerning. Okay, and if I were to design a logo or a headline or something like that, I would hand kern this. Okay, that's just professional procedure. You can also letter space, where each one has a certain amount of space in between characters. Okay. Then there's also tracking. Okay, and tracking is a little bit different than letter spacing, but you are making the type, for example, very loose or very tight, depending on what you want to do. Generally, with headlines, logos, and so forth, you want to track tightly. Okay. Okay. So type in Illustrator is an important element. You have done a little bit of work with area and point type. Okay. Area type is great for brochures, columns, editable, text explanations and so forth. And then, of course, point type is great for things like this. So that's it for this presentation. Go ahead and let me know if you have any questions, okay? Thanks.